Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be working on another art doll piece. I thought it'd be a lot of fun to work on another bird type creature. Recently I did a hybrid between a macaw and a raptor and I thought that was a lot of fun. And this time around I thought doing another phoenix piece would be really cool. I came up with an interesting color scheme and really wanted to just kind of get into a little bit more bird type creatures. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to work on is going to be the clay head for our phoenix. So I have a lump of tinfoil connected to a glass container so I have something to hold on to, and I'm going to get this covered in clay and blend everything together so we have a basic shape to start with. Now for the beak, I wanted to try something really cool. I've used this mold before to make beaks, and I'm not going to make it a poseable beak, I'm just going to be using the pieces to make the beak itself. So I have a clear piece of resin for each part of the beak, and then I have gold flakes in it. Obviously these aren't real gold flakes, but I'm just going to press it into the clay and figure out how I want it, and then I'm going to continue sculpting the rest of the face. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the eyes. So I'm going to mark out where I want those. I'm going to kind of leave some little indentions, and then I'm going to add some balls of clay to mark out where the eyes are going to go. So I'm going to lay those out and kind of flatten them a tiny bit, and then I'm going to take strips of clay to kind of frame this and make the eyelids. I'm not going for something super realistic with these eyelids. I kind of want the face to look like charred and bumpy and stuff, so I'm going to kind of make them just look like eye holes. So I'm going to be making the eye pretty sunken in, and then for the texture around the eye, I'm going to use my tool to make a bunch of little divots and lumps and stuff like that. And then I'm also going to be using one of my brush tools to really rough up the surface. Okay, so now I'm going to get ready to do a bake. So I'm going to be taking off my clay pieces. They are safe to go in the oven, but sometimes working with clear resin, it'll cloud up a little bit, so I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to pop those off, and I'm going to bake our clay head for about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once that's done baking, I can reattach our resin pieces, just use a little bit of hot glue, and then I'm going to switch over to my epoxy sculpt clay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around where we have the pieces connected and cover that up. That way you don't see that like seam that goes along it. And I'm going to add a texture to this and make it look all charred and bumpy, kind of like we did around the eyes. I'm also going to add a little bit of extra clay here and there to reshape the face, and add lumps on top of our beak section because I thought it'd be cool to have some lumps of charred pieces there too. And then once I'm happy with how our clay head looks, I'm going to set it off to the side to finish curing. And then once it's done hardening all the way, I can start painting it. And I'm pretty much just going to be using some blacks and a little bit of white. So I'm going to start getting that clay portion of our face completely covered in black. I'm going to do my best to try and not get it on our resin beak because I want that to stay nice and clear. If I do get it on, I am going to try and wash it off using like Q-tips or something. So I'm going to carefully go around everything on the beak and get everything completely covered in black, and then I'm going to switch over to a light gray, and then I might even use a little bit of a white to start adding some highlights. So I'm just gonna very lightly go over everything, that way it kind of lightly catches on the more raised portion. Now as I get closer to the base of the head, I'm going to add more and more white because we are going to have this transition into a white fur fabric. So basically the head and different sections are going to be charred with black, and the body of our phoenix is going to be white. Lastly, I'm just going to add a little bit of a gold highlight to some of the decorative bits that are on top of the head. Now I do have a little bit more painting and clay work to work on, but before we can do that, I do need to start on some of the sewing. So here is our pattern for our phoenix. I'm going to be giving him pretty long legs, and then I've got an idea for the feathers and stuff. So I have more of an arm pattern right now for the wing. Now the clay that I need to do next is for the claws. So what I'm going to be doing first with sewing is I'm going to start working on our feet. So I've got a pattern laid out so it has the 3 toes in the front and 1 toe in the back. Now I'm going to be using mink fabric for this because it's all I have, but I'm going to be using the backing for the actual texture for the legs. So I have everything kind of backwards right now. So I've got my pattern drawn out on the fluffier side of the fabric, and I've got the 2 fabrics pinned together. And then I'm just going to be sewing all the way around this, making sure to leave openings at the end of each toe. Once I'm done sewing around, I'm going to cut this out, and then I have a little line drawn out on the middle section of the foot. That's where we're going to connect the foot to the leg. So I'm going to cut there, and then I'm going to use that to flip our toes right side out. After that, I have a wire frame set up, that way we have wires for each toe, and I'm going to run this over the wire frame. I'm going to adjust the lengths of each wire for the toes so they're the correct length that I need, and then I'm going to get my epoxy sculpt out and start adding the clay at the ends of the wires. I'm going to taper each claw to a point, and then I'm going to set these aside to finish curing. Once they're done, we can glue the fabric around the bases of the clay, and then we can start stuffing the toes and everything. And then for the painting, right now I'm just going to be painting the claws black and blending that into the fabric so it kind of fades from the gray to the black. So I'm just going to do that. We'll probably do a little bit more painting once everything is put together. Moving on to the rest of the sewing, I'm going to take the left and right for each side of the body, and I'm going to start working on the back legs. So I'm going to take the inside fabric pieces for each leg, and I'm going to sew down the front of them, connecting them to the sides of the body. Next, we're going to take the fabric for the wings, the top portion, which is more of the arm section of the wing, and I've got a top and bottom for each one. We're going to pin them together and sew down the very top of it to connect them. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sew them in place on a hole that we have on each side of the body. Next, we're going to take our belly piece and we're going to connect each side of the body to the side of the belly. So we kind of want one solid piece of fabric, like an article of clothing, that we can run over a wire frame. Last thing we're going to add to this for now is going to be the long section of the leg, and just like the toes, this is going to be inside out, so we have the backing as the texture for the feet. So we're going to take this and pin each piece together, sew down the front, and then we're going to sew and connect it to each leg. Okay, so the next thing that we need to work on is making the feathers for the wings and the tail. So I'm going to be using a minky fabric for this. I've got my little feather shapes all drawn out on the backing, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add fabric glue to make this stiffer. That way it's not floppy like our normal fabric. I want it to actually hold its shape a little bit more. So I'm going to get the fabric wet, and then I'm also going to add my fabric glue to this and let everything dry. Once the fabric is dry, I can start cutting out my feathers. And then I also want to kind of paint the tips of some of them to give that scorched look to the wings and tail. So I'm not going to do all of the feathers, but mainly the ones that'll be at the end of the wings. So all I'm going to do is add a little bit of black paint to the tips of the feathers that I want to paint. So I'm just going to go over it lightly and then kind of darken it as I get closer to the end of the feather. So I'm going to have to let these dry, and then I'm going to start sewing the feathers together to make the wings. I'm going to start layering them and figuring out where I need them all to go. I'm going to use my sewing machine at first, but as I get the fabric layers thicker and thicker, I'll need to start hand sewing the feathers in place. And then once I have those put together, I'm going to start adding everything to our wireframe. So I've got a pretty simple wireframe setup, one that has a wire for a neck, the body, the wings, the legs, and a tiny one for the tail. I'm going to take our fabric for the body and I'm going to run it over the wireframe, making sure all the wires go through the different sections that they need to. Then I can take my clay head and I can glue it to the end of the wire for the neck. Once that's dried, we're going to take the fabric for the neck and glue it all the way around the base of the head. Now we can start closing up our phoenix. So I'm going to start at the base of the head and I'm going to sew all the way down till we get to the very end. While I'm doing this, I'm going to be stuffing the neck and body. Once I have the body stuffed and we've sewn to the very end, I'm then going to start working on adding the legs. So the fabric toes that we have, I'm going to take the wireframe that those are on and I'm going to connect it to the body wireframe. So I'm going to wrap those all together and then I can start sewing the legs in place. So I'm just going to take the leg fabric and sew all the way around the base of the foot. Once that's done, I can start stuffing and closing up the rest of the legs. Now we just have one hole at the very end where we can add our tail. So to make the tail, I have a top and bottom piece of fabric. They're pretty simple. It's kind of like a little house shape, so it's square with a roof. And I'm going to start sewing the feathers in place, and then we can start sewing this in place on that spot for the tail. After that, we're going to take the feathers for the wings, and we can start closing up the wings while we sew the feathers in place. And of course, we're going to be stuffing them too. So I'm going to get those in place, and then we just have a few extra details, mainly for the face and the feet. So for the feet, I thought it'd be cool to add just a little bit of extra line work to them, but I want the lines to be pretty thin, and I figured it would be easier to do a little trick with a string. So basically I'm just dipping a piece of my string in the paint, and then I'm putting it on the fabric. So just to make a really tiny thin line without having to get a really tiny brush. And then for the face, what we're going to be doing is furring the face, and I'm going to be using a black fur fabric for this. So for the larger sections, I can just glue the fur fabric in place and then shave it, but for the smaller sections, I'm going to use those fur trimmings to kind of blend the fabric into the clay so you don't see that seam where the fabric starts. And then I thought the face needed a little bit more like glimmeriness to go along with the beak, so I took a few gemstones and I started gluing them in place. At first I just went along a pattern, and then I decided to go a little bit more random on the side of the face. Lastly, I had a few extra golden beads, and I thought these would look really cool kind of dangling, so I'm going to connect these to the bottom of the head. Okay guys, and here is our phoenix. I had so much fun with this project. It's definitely a little different than most phoenix. I kind of picture this being more of a ground type phoenix that would live more around volcanic ash. I don't know, just kind of something interesting. I really love how the face came out though. We'll have to try and do some more like clear resin pieces like this. It came out really pretty. Anyways guys, I'm going to have this little guy on my website, so if anyone wants to buy him, give him a new home, you can check the links down below for that. I have a bunch of other art dolls down there. Also in the description I'll have a bunch of different links to different art supplies. These are ones I like to use to make my dolls, so if you're just curious or if you want to try something out, I figured it'd be helpful. Plus, these are affiliated links, so if you do buy anything through them, it does help support the channel. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!